Long before Columbus set sail across the Atlantic, a vast world thrived on the American continents. Civilizations rose and fell, empires flourished, and cultures passed down knowledge through generations. This was a land of cities rivaling those of Europe, of engineers who built pyramids and astronomers who mapped the stars, of hunters who followed the great bison across endless plains, and of storytellers who carried history in their voices. But so much of this story has been forgotten or deliberately erased. To many, Native America only begins with the arrival of Columbus in 1492. Yet the truth is far deeper, richer, and older. These were not empty lands waiting to be discovered. They were home to millions of people, each with their own traditions, innovations, and beliefs. Join us as we journey back in time to uncover the hidden history of the first peoples of the Americas, their triumphs, their struggles, and the legacy that still shapes the world today. The story of Native America begins not in 1492, but tens of thousands of years earlier, during the last ice age. Around 30,000 years ago, the Earth's climate was colder and massive glaciers locked away much of the world's water. Sea levels dropped, exposing a stretch of land called Beringia, which connected Siberia in Asia to Alaska in North America. Between 20,000 and 15,000 years ago, small bands of hunter-gatherers crossed this land bridge. They were skilled survivalists, following herds of mammoth, caribou, and giant bison. These were the first humans to set foot in the Americas. For centuries, they lived in the harsh tundra of Beringia, hunting and adapting. Archaeologists believe that as the glaciers began to retreat around 13,000 years ago, new routes opened into the heart of North America, through ice-free corridors and along the Pacific coastline. By 12,000 years ago, the first peoples had spread across the continent. Evidence of the Clovis culture, known for its finely crafted stone spear points, has been found from New Mexico to Nova Scotia. These hunters left their mark across two continents, from the Arctic Circle to the southern tip of South America. By 10,000 years ago, mammoths and mastodons had vanished, likely due to both climate change and human hunting. But the people endured. They turned to new foods: bison, deer, fish, and wild plants. By 5,000 years ago, agriculture began to flourish. Corn, beans, and squash, sometimes called the Three Sisters, were cultivated in Mesoamerica and gradually spread northward. Farming allowed permanent villages to form. Over time, these villages grew into towns, and towns into great cultural centers. By the time Europeans arrived in the late 15th century, North America was home to an estimated 7 to 10 million people, speaking hundreds of languages and belonging to hundreds of nations. These were not primitive wanderers, but established civilizations rooted in the land for millennia. By 3000 BCE, native peoples of North America had already begun transforming the land into a home shaped by both nature and human ingenuity. Agriculture, trade, and cultural traditions created thriving societies long before Europeans even imagined a world across the Atlantic. In the valleys of the Mississippi River and its tributaries, early farming communities cultivated corn, beans, and squash. By 1000 BCE, these farming practices supported permanent settlement. One of the earliest known cultures, the Adena, flourished between 1000 BCE and 200 CE in the Ohio Valley. They built large burial mounds, some more than 60 feet wide, carefully shaping earth into ceremonial monuments. These mounds were not only grave sites, but centers of community and spirituality, showing a deep reverence for ancestors and the cycles of life and death. By 200 CE, the Hopewell culture rose in the same region. The Hopewell people expanded trade networks that stretched across thousands of miles. From the Great Lakes came copper, from the Gulf Coast seashells, from the Rockies obsidian, and from the Atlantic bright mica. These items, found in their mounds, reveal a web of connection and exchange that linked distant peoples into a cultural whole. But the most powerful and influential of the mound-building traditions was yet to come. Around 800 CE, near present-day St. Louis, a new city emerged, Cahokia. At its height, around 1050 to 1200 CE, Cahokia was home to over 20,000 people, making it larger than many European cities of the same period. Its centerpiece, Monk's Mound, rose nearly 100 feet tall and covered 14 acres, an engineering marvel built entirely by hand. Cahokia was more than a city. It was a political, spiritual, and economic hub. Priests, chiefs, and laborers worked together under a complex system of governance. Rituals tied the people to the sun, stars, and seasons. Vast plazas hosted festivals and gatherings. And from here, influence radiated across the Mississippi Valley, touching tribes for hundreds of miles. Yet Cahokia's greatness was not eternal. By 1350 CE, the city began to decline, perhaps due to climate change, overfarming, or conflict. But its legacy endured in the oral histories of neighboring tribes and in the very earthworks that still rise from the soil today. Beyond the Mississippi, other cultures flourished. In the American Southwest, the ancestral Puebloans, often called the Anasazi, built stone villages and cliff dwellings. By 900 CE, places like Chaco Canyon in New Mexico became centers of astronomy, trade, and religion. Roads stretched for miles across the desert, connecting dozens of outlying settlements to the canyon's ceremonial core. By 1200 CE, the Puebloans of Mesa Verde built extraordinary homes high in the cliff's stone apartments tucked under rock overhangs, safe from enemies and the elements. These dwellings still stand, silent witnesses to centuries of human resilience. In the forests of the Northeast, powerful confederacies were taking shape. Oral tradition tells us that around 1450 CE, 5 nations, the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca, united to form the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, later known as the Iroquois. Bound by a great law of peace, they created a democratic system of governance with councils and consensus building that would later inspire European thinkers and even the framers of the United States Constitution. Across the continent, from the Arctic Inuit, who mastered life on ice and snow, to the Plains tribes who hunted vast herds of bison, each region shaped unique lifeways. Together, they formed a tapestry of civilizations, each adapted to their environment, each connected to the land in ways that balanced survival, community, and spirit. By the eve of European contact in the late 15th century, North America was not an untouched wilderness. It was a world of nations, with rich histories, sophisticated systems of governance, bustling trade, and sacred traditions. In 1492, a sailor named Christopher Columbus, sailing under the Spanish crown, crossed the Atlantic Ocean and landed in the islands of the Caribbean. To him, it was a new world. But in truth, it was a world that had existed for tens of thousands of years, home to millions of native peoples with their own cultures, histories, and nations. Columbus's arrival marked the beginning of a profound transformation, one that would reshape the Americas forever. At first, contact was cautious curiosity. The Taino people of the Caribbean welcomed the strangers with gifts of food, cotton, and parrots. But soon, misunderstanding turned to exploitation. Disease, slavery, and violence swept through the islands, decimating native populations. By the early 1500s, Spanish expeditions pushed into the mainland. Hernán Cortés landed in Mexico in 1519, encountering the Aztec Empire. Though far to the south, the ripple of conquest spread across the continent. Francisco Vázquez de Coronado led an expedition in 1540, exploring the American Southwest in search of mythical cities of gold. His soldiers clashed with Pueblo villages, leaving behind scars that would last for centuries. Meanwhile, in the north, Jacques Cartier of France sailed up the St. Lawrence River in 1534, making contact with the Iroquoian-speaking peoples. French traders soon followed, drawn not by gold but by furs, which became the foundation of an enduring relationship. Unlike the Spanish conquistadors, the French often allied with native tribes, marrying into their communities and joining their wars. By the 1600s, English settlers arrived along the Atlantic coast. In 1607, they founded Jamestown, the first permanent English colony. Here, the Powhatan Confederacy, led by Chief Powhatan, cautiously welcomed the newcomers. But as settlers expanded, tensions erupted into war. Between 1622 and 1646, the Anglo-Powhatan Wars ravaged Virginia, leaving native lands diminished and their people scattered. Further north, in 1620, the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth. Here, the Wampanoag, led by Massasoit, formed an alliance with the struggling English settlers. For a time, peace held. The famous Thanksgiving of 1621 celebrated survival through cooperation, but within a generation, relations soured. By 1675, King Philip's War, named after Massasoit's son, Metacom, exploded across New England, one of the bloodiest wars per capita in American history. Throughout these years, one silent enemy devastated Native America more than swords or guns. Disease. Smallpox, measles, and influenza, carried across the ocean by Europeans, spread faster than explorers themselves. Entire villages perished before ever seeing a European face. Historians estimate that in the century after Columbus, native populations may have declined by as much as 80 to 90%. For native peoples, the arrival of Europeans was not one story, but many. Of trade and war, alliance and betrayal, curiosity and catastrophe. The Mississippi farmers, the Iroquois diplomats, the Pueblo builders, the plains hunters, all faced new challenges as waves of strangers pressed upon their shores and into their lands. The world was changing. And though native nations resisted, adapted, and endured, the balance of power had shifted forever. By the 1600s, the coastlines of North America were no longer mysterious frontiers, but contested territories. European colonies were spreading, and native nations found themselves at the center of a struggle for survival, diplomacy, and land. In the Northeast, the French forged powerful alliances through the fur trade. Canoes laden with beaver pelts traveled the rivers to Quebec and Montreal, where native hunters exchanged furs for muskets, cloth, and metal tools. The French allied most closely with the Huron-Wendat and Algonquin peoples, but this drew them into conflict with the Iroquois Confederacy, who sought to dominate the fur trade. The result was the Beaver Wars, roughly 1628 to 1701. Armed with European guns, the Iroquois launched campaigns against rival tribes, expanding their influence from the Great Lakes to the Ohio Valley. For decades, villages were destroyed, populations displaced, and new migrations began. By the 1701 Treaty of Montreal, peace was restored, but the landscape of native alliances had been permanently redrawn. Farther south, the Spanish strengthened their grip on the American Southwest and Florida. Missions were established to convert native peoples, blending Christianity with European rule. In 1680, however, the native peoples of New Mexico, led by Pope of the Pueblo, rose in rebellion. The Pueblo Revolt drove the Spanish out for over a decade, the most successful native uprising against European colonizers. In the southeast, tribes like the Cherokee, Creek, and Choctaw navigated a complex world of trade and diplomacy. Some aligned with the English in the Carolinas, others with the Spanish in Florida, still others with the French in Louisiana. Each decision was a gamble, as alliances often shifted with the tides of European wars. In Virginia and New England, expansion of English settlements brought wave after wave of conflict. The Pequot War of 1637 devastated the Pequot people of Connecticut, nearly erasing them from history. Later, King Philip's War of 1675 to 1676, led by the Wampanoag leader Metacom, brought massive destruction to New England. Entire towns were burned, and native power in the region was broken. By the early 1700s, the Atlantic seaboard was firmly in colonial hands. But beyond the Appalachian Mountains lay vast native homelands still free from European settlement. The Great Plains, the Rockies, and the Pacific Northwest remained indigenous worlds, untouched by large-scale colonization for now. Yet even in areas of intense conflict, native peoples showed remarkable adaptability. Some tribes embraced European goods, integrating firearms, horses, and metal tools into their cultures. Others resisted fiercely, refusing to bow to colonial rule. Many did both, trading when useful, fighting when necessary. The Age of Colonization was not only a story of conquest, it was also a story of native diplomacy, adaptation, and survival. In council fires, warriors debated whether to ally with the French, the English, or neither. In villages, elders guided their people through times of upheaval. And in every region, native nations struggled to hold on to the land of their ancestors while navigating a world that was rapidly changing. By the mid-17th century, European empires stretched across North America, but native peoples still held vast territories. Their alliances and rivalries would play a decisive role in the next great conflict, the struggle between Britain and France for control of the continent. The 1800s were a century of devastation and resilience for Native America. It was a time when homelands were stripped away, when nations faced betrayal and bloodshed, yet still carried their traditions forward. The beginning of removal. After the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, the United States hungered for land. Presidents spoke of friendship, but treaties became tools of dispossession. In the Southeast, the Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Seminole, called the Five Civilized Tribes, adopted farming, schools, and even written constitutions. In 1821, Cherokee scholar Sequoyah invented a syllabary, giving his people a written language. They believed that by blending their traditions with the ways of the newcomers, they could hold their ground. But gold, discovered in Cherokee land in 1829, sealed their fate. In 1830, President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act, forcing tribes off their lands east of the Mississippi. The Cherokee fought removal through the courts, even winning recognition of sovereignty in Worcester versus Georgia, 1832. Yet Jackson ignored the ruling. In 1838 to 1839, over 15,000 Cherokee were marched west on the infamous Trail of Tears. Nearly 4,000 perished from hunger, disease, and cold. The Choctaw, Creek, Chickasaw, and Seminole faced similar forced marches. Only the Seminole resisted fiercely, waging the Second Seminole War, 1835 to 1842. Yet, by mid-century, Indian Territory in present-day Oklahoma became the new home for thousands of displaced people. The struggle moves west. But even in Indian Territory, peace was temporary. As settlers moved further west, the plains became the new front line. The Dakota War of 1862 erupted in Minnesota after years of starvation and broken treaties. It ended with 38 Dakota men hanged in the largest mass execution in U.S. history. Then came Red Cloud's War, 1866 to 1868, when the Lakota and their allies fought U.S. forces building forts along the Bozeman Trail. In the Fetterman Fight of 1866, 81 soldiers were killed in an ambush. For once, native warriors forced the U.S. to sign the Treaty of Fort Laramie, 1868, recognizing Lakota control of the sacred Black Hills. But when gold was discovered in the Black Hills in 1874, the treaty was broken. Custer's defeat, Little Bighorn. In 1876, the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, led spiritually by Sitting Bull and militarily by Crazy Horse, gathered thousands of warriors. On June 25th, they overwhelmed General George Armstrong Custer's 7th Cavalry at the Battle of Little Bighorn. Custer and over 200 men were killed in what became known as Custer's Last Stand. It was the greatest native victory of the century, but also their last. The U.S. retaliated with overwhelming force, breaking resistance within years. The Apache Wars. In the Southwest, the Apache resisted for decades. The fierce leader Geronimo, 1829 to 1909, led daring raids against U.S. and Mexican armies. His name became legendary for defiance, but in 1886, starving and outnumbered, he surrendered. He would die a prisoner, never allowed to return home. The Last Stand, Wounded Knee. By the late 1800s, most tribes were confined to reservations. The buffalo, once numbering in the millions, had been hunted to near extinction. Hunger and despair spread. Yet hope emerged in the ghost dance movement, a spiritual belief that promised the return of the buffalo and the ancestors, and an end to white domination. The U.S. saw it as a threat. On December 29, 1890, at Wounded Knee Creek in South Dakota, soldiers surrounded a Lakota camp. A shot rang out and chaos followed. More than 250 men, women, and children were massacred. Wounded Knee marked the end of the so-called Indian Wars. The spirit of survival. Though the 19th century was filled with loss, Native America did not disappear. On reservations, families carried on their traditions. Elders told stories of the old ways. Children learned their languages in secret, even as government boarding schools tried to erase their identity. Despite the devastation, from the Trail of Tears, 1830s, to Little Bighorn, 1876, to Wounded Knee, 1890s, the spirit of native nations endured. They adapted, survived, and carried their identity into the 20th century, ready to fight not with arrows and rifles, but with memory, resilience, and determination. The 1800s left scars that never faded. Yet through every march, every battle, and every betrayal, Native peoples held on to one truth. We are still here. Their survival was not just physical, it was cultural, spiritual, eternal.